Hey everyone, you're tuned into InfoQuench with Jeff.
And Amy. Join us as we talk about anything.
And everything.
All the stuff that makes life interesting.
So let's get to it. Hey everybody, and welcome to InfoQuench. I'm your host, Jeff.
And I'm Amy, and tonight we would like to welcome comedian Jeff McLennan to the stage.
How's everybody doing tonight? I mean, you guys made a big sacrifice to get here. I mean, who's going to drive the car? Who's going to pick up who? Who's going to...
Was that a Seinfeld impression?
Yeah, I tried to do a little
Well
bit
done,
Seinfeld.
well done.
I don't know, probably wasn't that good. But anyways, I did that for a reason. And the reason is that this podcast is going to be about comedians.
Right, all about the craft of comedy. And one of the things that is often talked about are the openings, what comedians say when they first come on stage.
Yes. Jerry Seinfeld, in his Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, has said to, I don't know who was on the show at the time, but he said, like, why do people come out and expect and like ask an answer or ask a question that they cannot get an answer from the audience when they first arrive? He said it's just like it's an automatic bad thing to do.
Right. Well, and maybe if you're, starting out and you've got an audience of a dozen people, but I mean, when you're getting into the arena level of thousands of people, yeah, it doesn't really make sense.
Now
but a lot of performers do that, right?
Yeah, he knows what he's doing too, I would say. He's been doing it for a long time. It's definitely in his blood. It's his passion. So, you got to take all that with a grain of salt. He's a pretty pompous individual, though, I find. You find so too, right, after watching the show? He says some things that are just like, what?
Well, yes.
Sometimes?
And anyway. I guess, so Jeff and I love watching stand-up comedy. We love and comedic, movies, television shows, series. Yeah. And it's just an interesting art form. Well, and there really is so much to it that we wanted to do a podcast episode that sort of delved a little bit into the craft of comedy and what goes into the act before the stand-up steps on stage.
Well, remember when we were kicking around ideas for this podcast and stuff, and we were just talking about how great it truly feels to just make your friends laugh or anybody laugh. Because in that one instance, when they're laughing, they're not thinking about anything negative. They're not thinking anything that bothers them. They're just truthfully enjoying their life. And that's the job of a comedian.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
I think it's an important one, particularly in times like this. And I agree. I love to make people laugh. And if you stick around long enough in this episode, you're going to hear me try to do a bit.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take what I've read and researched and learned, and show you just how difficult comedy can be when I fail miserably at my bit. Yeah. How's that for a positive setup?
They say, like, I know one of the things that Jerry Garcia, I was just listening to the Grateful Dead. You probably didn't even hear a note of it, really, did you? Did you notice that I put the Grateful Dead on earlier, by the way?
Was I in the room?
On a vinyl? What?
Was I in the room?
Yeah, you were. You might have had headphones on to your defense. Anyways, I forget what I was going to say now, but Jerry Seinfeld, what were we talking about? What were you saying?
Well, first, we're doing a podcast.
Yeah.
And we were talking about doing bits and practicing. And
yeah, he said that's one of the hardest things is to come up with the material for the bit.
Well, right. And so...
Excuse me.
In talking about that, a lot of, I guess, high-performing comedians, the ones who have really made it, and I've listened to quite a few different comedians being interviewed on various podcasts, they tend to have one thing in common in that they spend a lot of time just working on their bits, sitting down and writing things out, getting the words right, and then the next step is they get out into the clubs. Yeah. Charlie's no comedian.
He's doing his bit right now.
Yeah, if you can hear our cat. He just knows when we're recording it.
Well, he just knows, yeah.
I haven't seen him in hours, and then as soon as the mic goes on,
he wants to party too, though. That's the thing, right? He's like, I got some jokes.
Yeah,
I'm a joke.
I've hered his jokes.
I know.
So I think that's probably one of the consistent things between those who are successful and in the industry is that they are spending the time doing the work and then going out to the clubs and really working out the material.
Yeah,
I know when Amy Schumer did her documentary,
that was fascinating,
and showed how much went into preparing material for a 1-hour special, and it's literally months of going up on stage, having some comedians either record their set, or I think probably most of them do. They play it back, they see what got laughs, they have people taking notes and giving them feedback on what, where they should leave words out, where they need to rearrange things.
Where they need to, put in a pause and like all that stuff. You never really think about it, but it's all calculated.
Well, I mean, because the good ones do it so well, right?
Yeah, like Jim Gaffigan, for example. He is the master at little quick jokes after the big joke, and and then doing a face to get another laugh or whatever,
Well, he's likable. He's a likable guy.
He's clean, so is Seinfeld, right?
Yes, and I think that's an art in and of itself. I think, and Seinfeld has said this. He said he feels it's a bit cheap sometimes that people will use the shock comedy or swear just to get their audience's attention and get the laugh, and he feels that that's a bit of a cop-out. That
it's an easy way out.
You're not really working for the laugh.
Yeah,
with good material, you're using something else to color it up a bit, pun intended. We were reminiscing, actually. Jim Gaffigan was, I think, at the last live act we saw before the pandemic set in. He was here in St. John, New Brunswick, on his tour, and a
true craftsman. Because if you weren't there. He basically did some jokes about St. John, and I think he does that for no matter where he goes and visits, Like he went into our friend's bar and talked to the guy, talked to Jody at Five and Dime, and made some jokes about that, and it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, he and I think he went over into Europe too. So I know we have listeners from around the world. So if you happen to catch him on tour, I'm sure you picked up on the little pieces of information that he grabbed from your hometown or your home city, and how he plugs them into the act.
It's a smart thing to do.
I think they have a base, their base material, and then they just, add a little bit of a local flavor to it with those bits of information. I mean, if I was a comedian and I was just I'd be tempted just to hit the hotel room and rest up in between gigs. But I mean, he was out on the town eating donairs.
Yeah, he was.
Making sure he had all the right material. So
he loves the donairs.
One of the things that I've noticed about comedians is they do have different techniques, but I hadn't really thought too much about, how certain comedians go about their work differently. So for instance, some comedians, it's very autobiographical.
Yeah.
So they'll get up on stage and they'll tell the story about something that happened to them in their life. And, if they have kids or marriage, they'll use all that information for material. And one of the things that's criticized, though, is when they don't tell stories that are truthful.
Right.
So, for instance, if they're telling a story about their wife and they're not even married,
it's not true.
It just comes across as being very disingenuous,
contrived. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Because disgraced comedian Louis C.K. talked about a lot of things, like really personal things when it comes to his wife or his kids and stuff like that. They may or may not be true. It's actually a gray area because we don't know.
Well, that's right. I mean, with Jim Gaffigan, his wife actually helps him write his material, which I think is awesome. So,
that is really awesome.
And he travels around with his wife and kids when they're on tour often. So, yeah, it's, I would like to think that there's a lot more truth to the material. And sometimes you just hear comedians on stage like Andrew Dice Clay, and it's just cringeworthy.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this. So sometimes you go back and you might look up an older comedian from another era, and they might have had an act that was so famous, so appreciated back then. And when you listen to it now, it is so off base in terms of, being appropriate or,
I know.
It's amazing. We had put on, I think it was something by Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy, Raw or Delirious.
And we got in about 5 minutes and we're like, we can't watch this. Just, I guess we just know better now, right?
Well, I find
we know better. And
yeah. Another thing I find that's really interesting about some comedians is that their jokes are so good that when they deliver a really great joke, you as a spectator watching it think in your head, like I have on a few occasions, like, oh, they could take that joke so much further if they wanted to, but no, they don't need to because they've got more great jokes coming up. You know what I mean? I find that's really interesting.
It must be hard. It must be hard for them to figure out where to go and when to abandon a joke, even when they're halfway on stage and decide whether or not it's working. And there are comedians that you'll see that'll bring notes up on stage.
Yeah.
I think more so when they're working out the material.
Yes.
Obviously on a Netflix special or HBO, when they're at that level, they've got things down. But
that great scene where in that documentary called Comedians, is that what it's called, Comedians?
yes, I think it's called The Comedian.
The Comedian.
So it has two comedians, Jerry Seinfeld and Orny Williams, and it was in, I think, 2002. And it's really trying to show, I think, the juxtaposition between the comedian, a veteran who's made it. So this is, post the television television show Seinfeld.
Yeah.
And then Orny Williams is really just sort of starting out in his career. And
well, he's been going for a while though, but like you're right, things are starting to take off for him. Is that what you mean?
Yes, just sort of starting.
He worked real hard to get to where he was.
To get on to, was it, I think, the Tonight Show.
Yeah, Letterman.
And making those big steps. And it was interesting to see them. I think they showed both of them rehearsing in a similar fashion before the. They would essentially just have bullets of words that would prompt them for their bits, and they would memorize sort of the order that they wanted those bits to come out. So I found that whole part of it
that
really,
is fascinating.
really fascinating.
But there's that one scene though in the documentary where Seinfeld goes up and he's at this little club and he's got his little piece of paper, and he still couldn't remember what the joke was. Do you remember that? And
yes.
he was just like, he's like, this is a bad night, Anyway,
he completely lost.
You never really
his
think
thread.
of him having a bad night, but he's had the hard knocks as well. I think all comedians have bombed, and that's the only way you really learn. That's the way you learn in any really discipline like art or whatever. Like you don't know if it's going to work unless you try it.
Well, exactly. And I mean, it's something that you think is funny to you, when you're sitting down and writing it out or practicing it in your living room. Once you get out on stage, I mean, it's obviously the audience that'll tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been said that, there's no true justice like comedy. I mean, you have your critics' opinion immediately, and that, they're, for instance, when a film comes out and you have all of these critics who write reviews. Well, with comedy, the review has already happened.
Yeah.
People either laughed or they didn't.
Yeah.
And in that moment,
you
it
and
was
I are like
decided
that.
whether or not it was successful.
You and I are like that. If we're ready to watch a comedy special and we don't know the comedian, we know within like 2 or 3 minutes whether or not we find the person funny or not, and we'll move on to the next comedian. I mean, that's really interesting, isn't it? Either they're funny for you or not, period.
Well, it makes sense, too, that we've heard comedians comment in these various documentaries and interviews that they, I guess it's an amateur mistake to start out with your new material, because sometimes you do get excited and you want to try out new material on stage, but you need to start with what's tried and true and get the audience laughing, because once people start laughing, it's easier to keep them going. It's kind of getting that over that little hump. And
once
I've noticed
they've
that
accepted you, then you can kind of ride with things a little bit more. Yeah, you're right.
Well, even when I watch stand-up, when we watch something on, put a special on television, and it's sort of, once you get the first laugh or two in, I find that they come easier for me
true.
Personally. And also if the other people in the room are laughing, it's contagious.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you I don't know. You got to laugh. A comedian's got to kind of make you laugh, and not everybody's like strain of comedy is the same. Well, not all crowds are the same.
I mean, I talked about the autobiographical, style, and then there's also something that's more observational.
Yeah, so, like George Carlin.
George Carlin, absolutely. So then those who take the opportunity for political statements.
Yeah.
Jim Jeffries, I guess, would be more of a contemporary example.
Have we
of
watched
that.
Bill Hicks yet? You have to watch some Bill Hicks. He's funny.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
I have the worst time.
He's one of my favorite comedians.
I have to watch about 6 of their their specials before I can remember their names. I'm horrible with their names.
We'll have to watch some more. Even rewatch it because it's worth it.
If you're interested like we are in a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes with comedy and what goes into writing a bit or even just making comedy happen in film and on television, Kevin Hart has a new podcast out called Inside Jokes.
Yeah, I'd like to listen to that.
It actually just started last month, so there's only a couple of episodes out, but I listened to one, and it was interesting. It was well done.
Who's he interviewing? Like what comedian, or do you anybody famous?
Well, I heard Seinfeld, obviously. Seinfeld's really making the circuit, and so it leads me to think that he's because he is so in the limelight, he's ready to...
He wants to stay relevant.
Well, he hinted on having some major project on the go, something different than anything he's worked on before. So
I see. I wonder what that is.
And I think they're just sort of waiting for the pandemic.
Maybe he's doing a car show, just cars, no jokes.
Perhaps. Maybe that's it. But I was impressed with Kevin Hart, and one of the things that he said is even when he's acting, he never runs lines. He has such a great memory that he just needs to read through the script or the bit that he's written.
Who does, sorry?
Kevin Hart.
Oh, yeah.
And his memory's so good that once he's read it, he knows it.
Wow, that's a photographic memory, right?
Well, yes, and so it's... he said once he knows it and he understands it, it just becomes part of him, and he's able to dole it out.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether his directors would say whether he's line by line or if he's one of those people who ad libs, but...
I'd say he's like an observational comedian, like, you know?
And a bit of a storyteller, too.
Oh, yeah, I love that as well, like, you know, with comedians, is the storytelling aspect of it all. Like, that's Louis C.K. and, well, lots of comedians, really.
So there are different types of, I guess, gimmicks and things that you see with some comedians. Some will have a persona on stage. Yeah. I think he saw that more with the old school comedians, where they would really come out in sort of costumes with props and a lot going on. But or even a voice. You know, they might have a different voice that they use during their act. Yeah. And you know, Jim Gaffigan sort of has that inside voice.
Yeah, the inside voice.
Which is great. You know, it's
that would be like a function of comedy that if someone else did it, then it would be kind of ripping it off, because he's been doing it for so long, and it's his kind of trademark.
Yeah, it definitely seems very unique to him.
You know,
and that's something we always watch out for, is when you see an act that has already been done. Yeah, it really throws you off.
I remember as a kid seeing this comic, and he was called the Unknown Comic, and he did his whole bit with a paper bag over his head.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he was the Unknown Comic. There's probably YouTube videos. We'll check out, see if there is.
Oh, it's kind of like The Voice.
But he was like that old school Rodney Dangerfield kind of, like, you know, really quick one-liners kind of style. Anyway, I just remember that as a kid.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah, he just cut holes for his eyes and his mouth.
Well, I remember there was a bit around Cinnabons.
Mm-hmm. And
we saw it, and we
saw the same bit,
and then we saw another comedian do that bit.
Who was that?
And we were like, who did it first?
Yeah.
Who wore it best?
And we looked it up, and people were talking about it.
Well, yes,
because there was
picked that up very quickly.
What comedian was it that we? Oh, it was what's her name?
Amy Schumer.
Amy Schumer stole
she was accused of stealing material. It seems strange to me in today's day and age, when everything is recorded and shared on YouTube and, you know, just online in general, that people would, like, it's so easily identified when someone steals a bit. Whereas, you know, maybe 50 years ago, if you were in a club and you stole someone's bit, word of mouth might, you know, get around about it, but there really wasn't, you know, evidence. Yeah. Now there's evidence. Yeah. So it's a strange thing for people to do, and definitely a lazy way to do comedy. There's some really, I just want to mention some really brilliantly original methods too, like Neil
Brennan's
doing
Three Mics.
Three Mics.
That is,
if you haven't checked that out, it's on Netflix. It's a special where
check that out.
Literally is working three mics with three different personas
and styles of comedy, really,
and just so well done.
One mic is just one-liners that you have to, like, actually think about. You know what I mean? Like, almost like Stephen Wright, who's one of my favorite comedians of all time, is Stephen Wright. He had that really dry approach, you know.
It's almost like you're trying to make your voice dry as you're talking
about
his dry approach.
Excuse me.
You might need a drink.
I know. It was like, but he like, you know, he had jokes like, what if birds, when they died, they just stayed up there? You know, and I had a dog, his name was Spot. I spilled spot removal on him, and now I can't find him. You know, those kinds of things. Anyway.
I remember that guy. I remember that guy. Some comedians will use visuals too. I'm thinking there was an Amy Schumer special where she put up that painting her husband had did of her. Yeah. I think when she was in labor.
That's the biggest laugh of the show.
Oh my God, it was hilarious.
Easily.
I know. And
that's the thing that people leave with, you know.
And it was, you know, the fact that I think it's when it's real, That's the best stuff. That stuff's gold.
Absolutely.
Handling hecklers.
Yeah.
That in itself is an art form. And I've seen different
One that Michael Richards wasn't very good at.
No, that's well said.
Anyway.
And it's been said that there's no bad audience. If you can't get them to laugh, that's on you. But there's definitely some hecklers that are a little more aggressive than others.
Yeah.
And we've watched different, I guess, scenarios where on the Netflix specials and things, you don't get that type of thing. But
there's two versions of dealing with them. There's decimate them, make them feel like they're just ruining everything, and then there's just ignore them and like make a little joke.
Well, or even just,
I'd say,
even incorporate some people even incorporate it into their act. Like I had seen, I think it was a scene in a club in New York, and this woman was clearly drunk and being really loud and obnoxious.
Yeah.
And the comedian's like, just act natural. Nobody will be able to tell that you're drunk, and just really called her out on it, And rather than getting angry, just really it built it into the routine.
It's whatever makes. They're a comedian, so it's whatever gets a laugh. Whatever gets a laugh for the room.
A fascinating thing about some of the really high, we've talked about Jerry Seinfeld a lot in this because I think he's probably the epitome of a successful comedian. His net worth is he's getting up there close to $1 billion now. So definitely successful and legitimately so. He goes out still 3 weekends a month.
Yeah.
And does stand up in the clubs in New York.
And tries out new material.
I guess he goes to Gotham usually.
Yeah.
And I was listening to an interview with Jim Gaffigan was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he was talking about the fact that he does the same thing. He goes out, he said it's great, he can put the kids to bed, and then he can pop out to a club and try a set and work on his material. But he always calls ahead because he doesn't want to.
Yeah, he doesn't want to bump people.
He doesn't want to. Well, I guess he's very famous as well.
Yeah.
Very successful. So he realizes he would likely bump other people. So he'll call ahead to find out where there is actually a slot. But he laughed and said he also calls ahead because if Jerry Seinfeld's coming in, he's not even going to bother.
Yeah.
He tries not to hit it up at the same time because he knows he'll definitely get bumped.
Another thing about comedians that I find is that the ones that are really, really, really great are good people. They're not pompous like in that documentary, The Comedians, that aren't, what's his name? Orny
Williams.
He was very pompous and all about like climbing that comedian ladder and just doesn't matter. Like he's just so into himself that he lost the reality and the soul of what it means to be a comedian, it seemed. Even if he was funny, he still was ugly on the outside. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it certainly came across as though he was not in it as much for the love of the craft, but more for the desire to be famous.
Yeah, I know.
And, and wanting and becoming very, angry at the audiences, like not when he was on stage, but just his.
No, I just
and was not open to any type of criticism whatsoever.
But just to talk about this just a little further though, like how many comedians do you feel we know that are like that we absolutely love? Because we would never know if it wasn't on a documentary like that. We would never know what kind of person they are.
I mean, look what comes out around Bill Cosby, Louis C.K.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
they idolized Bill Cosby on the show. Like this was obviously before all that came out, but as far as a comedian was concerned, he was the pinnacle for Jerry Seinfeld.
Right.
And many others, which is just like, anyway, this is an interesting aside, which is what I'm good at.
An interesting series that Jeff and I watched was The Marvelous Miss Maisel, which is on Amazon Prime. So
that was great.
If you haven't checked that out, it's really well done, and it shows, I guess the focus is on her as probably one of the first female comedians in the. Obviously, it's fictional, but there are references to like Lenny Bruce. It would be the time of Lenny Bruce, and who did a lot through his comedy in terms of just for free speech and trying to really test the boundaries with censorship. Yeah, and was arrested several times, but there is somebody who makes an appearance to represent Lenny Bruce in Marvelous Miss Maisel, but. What I found fascinating about that series is just how much work it took for her to get to where she needed to be. Yeah. And how they all go into the clubs and they try to get up on stage. They're at the mercy of the club owners to put them up there. They're at the mercy of the audience. Sometimes they're, waiting around for hours just to get a 15-minute set in. And, it really takes a lot of work. And
takes a lot of work.
And they're putting themselves out there full on, It's very bare, very raw, and really being left open to criticism.
I find that some of the best comedians look at their art form as more theater rather than like telling jokes. Telling jokes is part of it, but it's more like it's the whole thing. Like, I love comedians that have really expressive facial expressions or, actions with their body while they're telling a joke, or, that to me is really, really, really brilliant.
Well,
it's a full package.
I'm always listening to podcasts when I walk to and from work. Luckily enough, I have some time to listen to podcasts, so I listen to comedians on that, and it's interesting to just hear their humor, and not be able to see them, and to see if they're still able to make you laugh.
Yeah.
And it's a strange time now walking to work because of COVID going on, and so I always walk, and I'm usually on the sidewalk, but I'm lucky enough I don't run into a lot of people during my commute.
Right.
But if I do, I'll take a few steps out and get out onto the street.
Yeah.
And I do that till I get about to the last block before my office, and then all of a sudden it's like this jam-packed sidewalk because there's a series of bus stops.
Yeah.
And I'm just, it's like running the gauntlet.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like now in the pandemic. But it's everybody's standing around smoking, waiting for their bus. They got their masks around their chin. And I'm like, do I step out on the street and risk getting hit by a bus? Or do I stay on the sidewalk and run the gauntlet? And I completely step out on the street and have not yet been hit by a bus. But, it makes me think too, though. There's a certain benefit of staying 6 feet away from people.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking we need to carry this on even after COVID. Think about all the benefits of this. You don't have to worry about what's in your teeth. If you ate garlic the night before, no one's going to smell it. You don't have to worry about other people's breath. You don't have to worry about their BO. And it's like, you ever have someone jam into your heels with their grocery cart in the grocery store and be like, no, that's not going to happen. 6 feet away. It's like, if I don't know you and you're not in my bubble, you just stay 6 feet away from me forever. And, I think that's what we need to do. If we can just agree as a society that we'll just keep that going.
Yeah.
I haven't been sick in forever.
Yeah, I haven't been sick in 2 years or so. Knock on some wood. I find some wood here. There we go. Yeah, that was your bit, wasn't it?
That was my bit.
That is awesome. Good job, honey.
And close talkers won't even exist anymore.
Yeah, we know some close talkers too. So
that was my bit.
Yeah, that's a pretty good bit. That's you could elaborate on that though, and and you know what? It's a visual thing too, right? Because people didn't see, but you had you were holding on to that shopping cart when you were telling the story. So, I mean,
well, the other thing about COVID is I can never go back to not knowing how germ-ridden everything is. I'll never touch a doorknob or a gas pump handle or a shopping cart in the same way.
Yeah.
Everything now, we can't go back to unknowing.
I know. I don't know where everything is going to go, but,
That wasn't the bit. That was just...
That wasn't your bit?
That was just me going on about COVID at
that
the
part,
end.
yeah.
At that end.
Oh, that was good.
No, well, it's interesting because I did think a little bit about the sequence of that. I decided I would do it more in a story format, and it's definitely something that's true. It's something I go through every day, going through that walk along the gauntlet and past the smokers. And, it's not an easy thing to do to try to put a comedic bit together. It made me really appreciate when someone gets up there and does an hour of material. And
an hour.
An hour. And, getting the sequence, getting the pauses, getting the laughs.
It would be so nerve-wracking. Like, what if you got out there? I mean, I've done this in theater where you forgot your line, and someone's always there to tell you your line. There's no one there to tell you your line.
No, you're out there on your own.
You're out there on your own.
So the next time if you're...
There's a lot of really great local comedy here as well.
check out some local comedians. And you know what? Give them...
John Forward and...
Whoa, that was one racing car that just went by. That was up our street.
But James Mullinger, Chuckles,
yes,
all kinds of great.
And so that's here in St. John, New Brunswick. But from wherever you're listening to from, make sure you check out your local comedians and show them some support, show them some love, because it's not an easy thing. And thank God that there's people out there to make us laugh.
Yeah, because we need these laughs during this COVID-19 crap.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time on InfoQuench.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening.
And remember, you can catch up on past episodes at infoquench.com.
Or just about anywhere else you get your podcasts.
Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
And help spread the word about InfoQuench.
Till next time.